Hi, I'm Mark Tyrrell of Uncommon Knowledge and hypnosisdownloads.com, and welcome to Stop Being a Hypochondriac, 4 ways to trust your body more. Now, Lily was a client of mine in her 30s, and she had experienced in her mind just about every major illness that you've heard of, and a few that you probably haven't heard of. And when I met her, she was almost permanently convinced that her immediate future held unspeakable medical horrors. So the hypochondriac doesn't want to be ill, but nor do they want to be dismissed as just imagining it. It's a tormenting psychological catch-22. So the paradox of hypochondria is that the sufferer often knows that they're hypochondriac, even whilst maintaining that they are justified in believing that they're ill. Okay, it's a kind of doublethink, and it's at the heart of many obsessions. Merely trying to reassure someone directly seldom works, or doesn't work for very long. Unsurprisingly, research shows that hypochondria runs in families. Family members teach each other attitudes, or memes, and which then get passed on again. It also won't surprise you that people are more likely to become a hypochondriac if they've witnessed serious illness. Check out reference 2 in the written article for this to see the research into that. So if you experience something horrible, your brain may wrongly tag that event as being much more likely to occur again than it actually is. Okay. Probability gets all mixed up with possibility, which might be very small. So was Lily's hypochondria typical? Hypochondria is really about fearing the worst, of course. A key feature of hypochondria is the inability to be reassured by relatives, friends, or even medical experts for any length of time. So, medical tests can be addictive, but only serve to reassure momentarily. What if they miss something in that scan? Or what if they mixed up my results with someone else? So Lily was the same. She would have medical tests done, but then barely believe that they were accurate, or that maybe something had developed since she'd had the test and so forth. So she wasn't reassured for very long. She'd be okay for a time, but sooner or later the doubts would grow back like recalcitrant weeds blocking the sunshine from giving what a garden really needs in order to flourish. So a hypochondria was classic, really. Her mother had always been extremely anxious about health, and when Lily was 25, her father had been diagnosed with cancer and tragically died a few weeks later. And of course that had been extremely traumatic for her and a terrible shock. Predictably, this was a huge life event for her, and her fear of illness greatly intensified after her tragic loss, rippling out to affect her family, social life and love life. And she said, my husband is being driven to distraction, and I worry that my eldest son Sam is starting to talk about his health, and he's only 4 years old. There's something I try to avoid when working with anxious obsessions, and I think you should avoid it too. So I want to talk about what doesn't work with hypochondria. The worst advice is try not to think about it. Why? Because trying not to think about something is still focusing on it. Distraction is a great technique for diminishing anxieties, but it needs to happen in such a way that the distraction feels natural. Otherwise, it's just a case of, I know I'm trying to distract myself from the fear of what that headache may be. Okay. So anxiety is like water. It needs a container, a thought to give it shape, a channel to flow through. That shape may be insecurity in a relationship, or fear of the boss, or hypochondria, or anything. So we have a stress level that builds up in the body, and then the mind has to form a shape to contain that stress. And the shape is an imagination. Or formed from an imagination. If you try to take away the container by advising that they just try not to think about it, the water is still there, the stress level is still there. So it'll just find another shape to inhabit. To cure someone of an overwhelming worry, we need to deal with the source of the worry, the feelings or the stress itself, not just the container or the imaginings, okay, the thoughts. So how did I stop Lily being a hypochondriac? Well, first off, it's important to say that cognitive behavioral psychotherapists may try to treat hypochondria by getting sufferers to analyze and alter their thoughts. And certainly this can be highly useful. Challenging negative thoughts can be extremely powerful, but it's not the thoughts so much as the feelings that are the problem. Okay, as I talked about the container and the content. Once you deal with the feelings, the thoughts take care of themselves. If someone's totally relaxed, they can imagine having any illness and they know it's just a fantasy, just an imagination. Okay, it's the stress that brings a sense of reality to it. So I asked Lily when she really worried. And she said, well, now I'm terrified I've got multiple sclerosis and I've been back and forth having various checkups for this. All have come back negative. But it's weird. Why would I be getting these symptoms? So I said, are you more likely to worry about your health when you're generally stressed? And she said, yes. We went on vacation last summer and I was great when we were away and I actually didn't think about it at all. So I talked to her about the fact that it doesn't matter what you think so much as what you feel when you think it. It's fine to think about horrible possibilities if you feel totally relaxed when you do so. Okay. Now that's quite a weird idea. Okay. So if you think about it, you have a wonderfully powerful imagination, I told her. But you need to stop getting sucked in by it. You need to stop buying into your imagination. Stephen King writes horror stories, but he can imagine and think about these scary things without actually being scared into believing in the reality of his stories. Okay, he's using his imagination, but he's being relatively calm, presumably, when he's writing those imaginings down. I myself could sit here and imagine an earthquake and being swallowed up by that earthquake, and I can fantasize about this without becoming scared. Okay, so hypochondriacs and all worriers fantasize about bad stuff, then look for any signs that seem to confirm the fantasies as real, then believe the fantasy. So confirmation bias. You're looking for things that back up the bias of your imagination. Next, Lily told me exactly how she worried. So we need to think about learning to relax whilst thinking the worst. Okay, this isn't the same as not thinking about it or trying not to think about it. So Lily was awakening in the early hours of the morning when she was in bed, imagining her symptoms and bringing them on hypnotically. She told me she'd wake up and then get the symptoms rather than being woken up by the symptom. Okay, and she'd imagine herself getting sick, ill, weak, becoming incapacitated. Eventually she'd imagine her own death and how her children would be devastated and how her friends would describe the tragedy at a funeral and so forth. And I said, wow, that's a lot to try not to think about. So I encouraged her to think about it. Okay, psychotherapists call this a paradoxical intervention. You can call it crazy if you like, but it worked in her case, and very quickly. It's easier and much more powerful to disentangle feeling from thoughts than to try to stop the thoughts directly, especially if the feelings are still underneath. So I encouraged Lily to relax profoundly and deeply, and whilst totally relaxed, to imagine her usual fears over and over again as one possibility of many projected possibilities on a whiteboard. She could then have the thoughts with the fearful feelings greatly diminished. So I was teaching her to imagine that, because why shouldn't anyone be able to imagine anything, whilst feeling deeply relaxed. And we take the charge out of the imagination when we do that. Okay. Once the feelings are gone, the thoughts naturally become much less compelling because there's nothing left to power them, so to speak. So Lily was amazed how she could relax whilst imagining all these fantasies, all these scary fantasies that she'd been having, and found that they weren't scary anymore. They were just fantasies. I set her this exercise in imagination as a therapeutic task. So she was to awaken at 4 and relax. Then think about what it would be like to become ill whilst remaining relaxed as she imagined that. And pretty soon she started sleeping through and not waking up at 4 a.m. And she found herself misusing her imagination less often, and because there was no fear attached to the imagining, what was the point? So she stopped thinking about it at all. This is just one strategy we used. I also helped her feel less traumatized by the sudden death of her father years before. But by focusing on the feelings rather than the thoughts, her therapy was rapid and effective. So if you're troubled by hypochondria, try these following tips. First, tip number 1, relax, relax, and relax. Remember what I said about the emotions driving the thoughts, and the emotions being like water, needing to find a container to give it shape. Okay. So if you feel stressed, you'll find things to feel stressed about. Well, the more you relax, the less your imagination will need to conjure up stuff to give shape to anxieties. Okay. Tip number 2, beware of self-diagnosis. Dr. Google can be wonderful in some ways, but looking up your symptoms to see what you've got is not a great idea, because, and I've actually done this when someone close to me thought they were sick. The fact is that just about any symptom you care to imagine can be linked to virtually any disease or condition, or none, that you can possibly imagine. What's more, when you know what symptoms to look for, you may well find them. Okay, so that's right. People can bring on the symptoms to some extent, as this client that I was mentioning, Lily, could do in the small wee hours of the morning. So ignorance really can be bliss, because knowledge may be no such thing. Okay, leave the diagnosis to experts who can look at your health in a wider context. My friend was convinced they had bladder cancer from self-diagnosis via websites. Turned out they'd been eating too much beetroot. Okay. Tip number 3, trust your body to look out for you. Remember and reflect on the fact that your body is your friend. It's always looking out for you. And in fact, of course, there's no really real division between you and it. Its purpose is to keep you safe. That's its job. So have some faith in it and take care of it, of course. Research unexpectedly shows that hypochondriacs are less likely to look after their health than people who aren't so anxious about their health. Check out reference 4, and that might be because they feel more helpless, as if they can't control things so much, so they don't take so much responsibility for their health. It seems that many hypochondriacs smoke, drink, perhaps in an attempt to calm frayed nerves, and take little exercise, maybe through fear of injury. So look after your body and trust it to do its best by you. Tip number 4, give your body a break. During a flight, nervous passengers tend to be hyper aware of changes in the sounds of the aeroplane, the speed, the amount the plane rattles during the turbulence, the expressions on the faces of cabin crew. They might say, oh no, what does that mean? So being hyper aware of every little change and then assigning scary meanings to those changes is a fast track to self-torment. The body does change and have different sensations, and aeroplanes do rattle around and make noises and move and so forth, and cabin crew do get bored or irritated, and that comes out in their facial expressions. Hypochondriacs will be hyper aware of every ache and pain, a muscle stiffness here, a dizzy spell after standing up too quickly there, and so forth. Your body is supposed to alter and have variation of feeling. It's a self-regulating system, and there are going to be natural and harmless changes in the way you experience your physical self. Your body is always sending messages to your brain, and vice versa. The vast majority of these messages are innocuous. Aches, pains, dizziness, stomach gurgling, pins and needles and headaches are symptoms of being alive, when they happen very occasionally. And of course, if they're happening all the time or a lot, then you need to go and get medical expert attention, not necessarily run to Dr. Google and diagnose yourself. Most of the time, these sensations signify that your body is just doing its thing the way it's supposed to. Hypochondria happens when people assume that any bodily signal is a portent to disaster, when it isn't at all. As you begin to worry less and relax more, you'll start to focus outward, engage in life, and feel more connected to people around you. Overcoming hypochondria will be a major step to developing as a person in all kinds of ways. So I hope you found that useful, and if you did, please hit like and subscribe. And if you want to hear when my next video is published, hit the notification bell below this video. I'm Mark Tyrrell of Uncommon Knowledge and hypnosisdownloads.com, and if you'd like to try some of my personal development products, head over to hypnosisdownloads.com and take a look around. And thanks for watching.